All right. Hi, that's the recording permission. So if you're watching this and you're joining us, you will be recorded. And this is Kennerly Clay. I'm with Give Pennsylvania Wildlife a Break. And I have a really special guest here, Jason Beale. And he is a volunteer with the Endangered Species Coalition, and he also has a lot of experience in this area in PA. And I just wanted to first get to know you a little bit, Jason, and I know that we will also get to an update on conservation corridors in Pennsylvania, which I'm very, very much looking forward to and have been a big proponent of for several years. So thank you for your patience. Thank you, anybody else who wants to join us for with a technology breakdown tonight. So Jason, please tell me a little bit about your background. Tell me what you do. Start from there. Thank you. Welcome.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'm the classic, kid that kind of grew up just in nature. And so when I was 3 years old, I lived in Louisiana and was walking through a yard with my friend. And back there in Louisiana, if it rained, everything flooded. But looked down at the ground, there was this tiny hatchling red-eared slider. And whatever reason, that was the most fascinating thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And that just kickstarted my career, really, in a sense of just wandering swamps, looking for frogs, snakes, and turtles. And later that expanded to botany and to birds. And I've had the opportunity, fortunately, to spend my career working in and around wildlife, in and around plants, and then educating folks and getting them to engage with the natural world and hopefully walk away wanting to give something back.
Yeah, that's awesome, really. And then when did you come to, how long have you been in Pennsylvania? Or have you lived here most of your adult life, or?
I was a student at Penn State in the late 90s, and then worked for about a year after that down at a place called Wildwood Park in Harrisburg, which is a county park, urban park right along the Susquehanna River. And it really highlights the value of wild spaces, not just for animals, but also for people. I mean, that park is heavily, heavily used because it is such a local treasure. And then wandered around, spent time in Ohio working for Audubon, managed Nature Center and Preserve in Delaware for 8 years. And then my alma mater, Penn State, had an opportunity for me to come back and actually lead a redesign of the animal care program at Shavers Creek, Penn State's Nature Center, where I started my career. So it was a great opportunity to kind of complete that circle.
That's awesome. And then is there anything that you've seen in your, progression here in Pennsylvania? What would you say has, where have we really made progress? Would you say?
Well, I think just the fact that we're using words like corridors and talking about wildlife crossings, that those are becoming part of the vocabulary. And I think it's always important to realize that wildlife corridors have always existed. So the Kittatinny Ridge, which is famous in southern Pennsylvania, but the ridge and valleys here, Tussey Mountain, Stone Mountain, which are just directly to my south, those are great migratory pathways for raptors, and they've always been such. And so now, kind of twofold, we're recognizing where these natural corridors exist so we can protect them, but also realizing where we have disrupted corridors and where we might put in a crossing to help restore that corridor viability.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's like the animals already know where they need to cross, right? They've been doing that for a long time. It's we that need to be more responsible about how we build around them, right? We are going to jump into that juicy conversation. Is there anything else that regarding conservation corridors? I mean, I know there was a House resolution that Mary Jo Daley, Representative Mary Jo Daley, had introduced along with a bunch of other folks. And we're curious to know if you know where that is and how that's being received and that kind of thing.
Sure. It's currently in the Tourism and Recreation Committee, which is great. It's going to review there. If they vote on that to move it out of committee, then it does go to the floor for a vote. And one of the things that's really exciting is Representative Aaron Coffer. He's a Republican from Luzerne County. He's also co-sponsored it. And there are several other Republicans on the bill. And so I think it really highlights that a lot of conservation legislation and is very, very important on both sides of the aisle. So whether you're a hunter or angler, whether you're a bird watcher, whether you just like to get out and stretch your legs along the river after a long day at work. Nature really has something for all of us. And so I think in a politically charged and divided time, bipartisan things that we can get behind is really not only a good story for wildlife, for the economy of our state, but also a good message to send that we can work together toward common ground and common goals.
Yeah, totally. I've seen that kind of happening it seems like on the national level with the Wildlife Corridors Conservation Act, and that was a bipartisan effort. And like you say, it's like who's not, taking a stand for nature and habitat and like that, right? So where does it all begin? I mean, is it like suddenly we're going to be all, all hearing these words and it's going to become mainstream conversation? Or is it like, there's a specific area that's really in need of this, attention, and they're going to kind of start there? Or how does it all start?
So we're approaching this here in Pennsylvania with what we call a conservation corridor study. And so the first step is to really kind of study where these corridors do exist. So once again, the identification, where corridors could be created or reconnected, and then what the impacts of those would be. And so this is kind of similar to the model that Oregon is using with their legislation. Other states have just gone kind of right in, like Virginia, and just passed legislation to develop and build corridors. And so a lot of it is really kind of understanding the political lay of the land and what has the best chance of moving through. And in Pennsylvania, we thought that just kind of doing the study up front would be more effective than introducing a bill which is tied to a lot of money without people understanding what that impact is going to be.
Right. And sorry, just was something you just said. Reminded me of other some of the places out west that had, disagreements about corridors. And I was curious to know if, for example, someone who has a big, huge farm and many, many acres and whatever, and they're kind of like, not in my backyard, I'm not sharing any space with anybody or whatever, do we have the same kind of issues here, or is it different because we're just in a completely different kind of, habitat and like that?
I think those issues really exist anywhere. And I think kind of getting to your earlier point of, what kind of specific projects, what it might look like. And I think that's really where the rubber hits the road. I think all of us know, and I've hit deer myself driving, my wife has hit deer, almost all of my friends have hit deer. And you get a sense of, there are places that are dangerous stretches of road for wildlife and then for humans as well. And so in those areas, I think there's a very clear benefit. So kind of going to Virginia, Virginia did pass legislation to develop corridors outright, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think they saw like a 90% reduction in deer collisions along the stretch of road that they put that on. And while that happened, but there's a big monetary tie up to that as well, because people aren't having to, total their cars and all of the medical bills or everything else associated with that. And they found that those corridor structures as crossings, I think, paid for themselves in less than 2 years. And so I think that's a really good example of where it can be done smart, where there is a real wildlife vehicle collision issue. That's also happened out in Washington State. The the Safe 97 project is a very dangerous stretch of road with, I think, over 330 mule deer killed each year. Mm-hmm. And they were able to, with some private funding, kind of build this first phase as kind of a show me opportunity for folks to really see how this can work.
Yeah. It's really inspiring to see that stuff happening. And then when it started happening on the East Coast, I was like, oh my God, Virginia's got it going on, and Vermont's got stuff going. They've had some, wildlife crossings and that kind of thing. And Florida's doing a great job too, So would you say that I always feel like Pennsylvania's kind of behind as far as this conversation goes. Is that, I mean, I don't want to be negative about that, but is it like, are we, on the verge of, or positions to, or is it like we're so far behind it's going to take a while?
I think it's just that I think anytime something is new and is proposed, there's always going to be challenges and pushback. But I think if you look to some of the Grower Greener grants that were in Pennsylvania, which established like the rails to trails and some of these other areas, those have become very beloved spaces for people. And I think when we start developing those for wildlife, what also in many cases people can use as well. I think once again, once you see successful projects on the ground, it starts to really change people's perceptions. I mean, there's always going to be the NIMBY folks, not in my backyard, but there's always going to be folks that are really happy to engage and help to preserve the biodiversity in our state, and as well as create more recreational opportunities for people.
Yeah, and then it's something also you touched on too with the, a while ago when I was first kind of writing about wildlife corridors in Pennsylvania, I have to say there were some people who were totally, got it, they knew all about it. And then there was a very large contingent, I have to say, that was like, what do you mean? Is the deer going to stop at the stop sign? And that kind of thing, So is it, is it a soft, I don't know, is it like are there going to be people that are resisting and not, or is everybody going to be like, oh, I get it, even if I'm a hunter or I'm a tree hugger, whatever I am, whatever my interest is, this thing is good for all of us. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I think, once again, I think it's going to come for, people's different perspectives. There's always the fear that if something, is, built and developed, that, that might impact people's ability to use that landscape. But I think with hunting rights in particular, especially with game land, some of our game lands and state forests are actually divided by highways and divided by some of these features, and reconnecting those not only can increase the flow of wildlife, like for example, between Bald Eagle State Forest and Rothrock, which has 322 running right up through it. If we're able to connect that area, then that also increases access for hunters as well as hikers and things. So once again, I think it's going to really kind of fall until people have the opportunity to experience it up close and personal. We're going to see.
Yeah, that's a wonderful, wonderful example. That's a really great example and a great point. Yeah, and I think that's why some of the Western state conservationists and the hunting communities are very involved in those, developing those crossings and all that kind of thing. So. Let's see, what else? What else can we talk about? Well, tell me, are there any animals in particular? The deer for me is just, that's why I'm here. I mean, it was just too painful. I couldn't stand it anymore. I didn't even know what to do, but it was like, I have to have a voice or just share something or whatever, because it's just heartbreaking, But are there any other animals that in Pennsylvania that are at particular risk to, road collision, vehicle collision besides our deer? I mean, it's an obvious question, but you know what I mean? Like, is there one that's more than the others?
I would say for me personally, amphibians and reptiles are a major concern. And, these are animals obviously that are much smaller, much slower moving typically. But the joke, why did the chicken cross the road? I'd like to say, why did the frog cross the road? And that's because we cut his habitat in half. And so for a lot of these species, like frogs and salamanders in particular, they're dependent on these seasonal wetlands, these vernal pools, which fill up in the spring and then dry out in the summer. So they're fishless ponds, which are very important for their young to develop. But oftentimes those are, once again, divided from the upland habitat by a road. And so where I work, driving through a state forest and then through Penn State's forest, there are several areas where just chronically you will see, like one spot in particular, I've seen salamanders, frogs, long-tailed weasel, all hit in the same area, and I've had a bear run in front of my car in the same area. So for whatever reason, this spot in the habitat is very important for these animals. It's near some wetlands, but once again, what's a good quarter for one species is often going to be very good for several others as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, the poor amphibians and those guys don't always get the love and attention that they deserve, right? But are you familiar with the Schuylkill frog crossing here? Do you know that they do that?
No, I'm not, but that sounds great.
Yeah, there's a woman who I met actually out in California at the thing that was promoting the big 10-lane thing over the LA Expressway. Mm-hmm. And she actually started it here. And when it's the mating season, I mean, they were getting squashed, like, that was like rush hour for the frogs and the cars. And so basically they still have it. They reroute every year. I
Wow.
mean, the whole area gets involved, and they make sure that the cars are rerouted and that the frogs can do their thing, and so it's pretty cool. Um, so let's see, what else can we talk about? Uh, the thing about the saving money, that's always the thing that I hear, oh, well, how much is that going to cost us, kind of thing, right? And it's pretty remarkable that you said that Virginia had a ROI within like two years or whatever. That's pretty amazing. And for me, it's like, oh my gosh, if we can save any of these animals from being destroyed and just completely slaughtered on the road, it's worth it. But people do want to hear, okay, how much of my tax money and blah, 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 blah. Does Pennsylvania have any, particular constraints or concerns around that? Or, how is the money being allocated, and, like that?
Yeah, of course, there's always concerns about funding. That's always the big limiting factor. But as you mentioned earlier, there are other things happening around the country. So 8 states actively have legislation either for wildlife corridors or in the works. And there's a number of states outside of that group that are actually pursuing these projects. And so I think there is a critical mass building. And I think we're talking right now here in the U.S. House and Senate about infrastructure bill here in the future. And I can't remember the numbers offhand, but I think over 3/4 of Pennsylvania's bridges are in fair to poor condition, like about 30% of our roads are, and that's just Pennsylvania.
Wow.
And so, these infrastructure projects, if you have a bad budget year, usually, okay, we'll just push the maintenance off for a year or two more. At a certain point, that rent comes due, that bill does come due, and it's going to cost money. And so, but right now, we have an infrastructure problem across the country where a lot of reinvestment needs to be made. And in many cases, fixing up a road or repairing a bridge at the same time provides opportunity for us to do these corridors while we're making use of this resource and this need for humans. So I think that's probably the best way to do it, because it's a win-win situation right there. These things have to be done, but we can do it in a way that's just beneficial for many species.
Yeah, that's really cool. So would it look like, say, oh, okay, instead of repairing things in this way, we can at the same time provide this access for these animals or something like that? Is that
Yeah.
what you're suggesting?
Yeah, so for example, I mentioned that spot where the amphibians and reptiles I see getting hit a lot. It's a low spot, so it's kind of a wet area. Those areas flood a lot. The roads get wet, they get soggy, they get moist. If you were to put just a short bridge or overpass over that area, it doesn't have to be too long. That saves the integrity of the road and then creates that underpass crossing for the wildlife. So I think
Cool.
I think that's a big part of it as well. A lot of times when people think of the government, they're thinking this one size fits all approach. Somebody from Washington is going to come in and tell me I've got to do this way. But really the beauty of this is looking at where is the issue. If you're in southeastern Pennsylvania, there's maybe an obvious deer crossing opportunity. If you're up in Potter County, maybe there's something for the elk that's very obvious. Every place is going to have their own specific concern and their own specific solution. And that's where I think the greatest opportunity is, because it allows each community to look at where they have an issue, where that solution could be, but do it in a place-based manner that works for that community. And I think once we start to see those projects crop up around the state, and especially if we can point to other ones in other states that are similar, then that helps to get everybody on board, because they're seeing the impact of it. And it's not just something that works here. It can work everywhere. It just has to be tailored to that location.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I was thrilled to see that like you said, like the words conservation corridor were actually used in an article in Pennsylvania. It was just so great. Another question I had that you just touched on, I forgot my question. What was it? Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I know what it was. Roadkill counting. Is that something that we're going to be doing? Is there, is somebody assigned to do that, or is that they're looking for an organization that's going to do that, or do they do that as part of, like the due diligence of, creating things?
I think that's a really important part. There is some data collected, but a lot of our data is based on deer collisions. So when you look at like the State Farm is kind of the classic repository of vehicle collision, but that's primarily just deer collisions, and that's reported deer collisions. And so, I know the first deer I hit, I wasn't going too fast, bounced off the car, kind of crumpled the hood a little bit, but it wasn't something that I was had the money at the time to fix. And so I didn't report it, just drove around for years like that. But I think that's something that, thinking about that.
Yeah, there's an organization out west that I read about, the cyclists, in Colorado. They got them on board with, who better than the people that are out on the road that can actually physically stop and see those things. So I thought it was a really brilliant concept. So yeah.
And really, I think, the beauty of that would be somebody set up like a community science program, what we might call citizen science. Ideally, if you have some kind of app or something, like you take a photo, geolocate it, and just, goes into a database, because that not only tells you where these collisions are happening. Once again, you put them on a GIS database, you can see where these things are. But very often, you can identify species which you may not know exist in an area, especially more uncommon species that are active at night. I was down in South Carolina last week and unfortunately saw an otter hit on the road, but you might not know there's otter there until you see one hit on the road. And obviously that's a unfortunate example, but it's a specimen that, verifies the presence of that animal.
Right. And then I guess maybe the last question I really have is, are there any since you're with the Endangered Species Coalition, Coalition, are there any endangered animals in Pennsylvania that are at specific risk of extinction because of vehicle collisions?
I'm not aware of any endangered species that are specifically like their existence in the state is threatened. But when you look at, especially once again, the amphibians and reptiles, many of those species are species of concern, and simply because those habitats have been fragmented, and as they can't move between them or get hit, those populations become further and further isolated. But another type of corridor we haven't talked about and really impacts a lot of endangered declining species are migratory pathways or migratory corridors. And so I mentioned the ridges for hawks. And so, our ridge and valleys start in the northeastern part of the state all the way down to the southwest. It's this long continuous ridge. But for many of these migrating songbirds that have been passing through the state in the past month, they're only dropping down periodically in certain spots. Monarch butterflies, the same way. They need that habitat. So they need that feeding source.
Mm-hmm.
They may need, a wintering place if it's like a short-eared owl, which is an endangered breeder in Pennsylvania. And so corridors, they can serve a terrestrial purpose, but they can also be, depending on the species, scattered around strategically for an animal that is flighted, that is moving over habitat, but needs to stop and refuel.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. I never, because we think in terms of on the ground migration, right? But
Yeah.
If they're, they've been looking for the same thing every year and it's no longer there because we put a road there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of our highway metaphor is really good for it. The highway is the corridor. You think about before we had highways. If you had to take back roads to drive even across the state, it'd take you forever, but this corridor makes everything easy. And that's all well and good. However, imagine driving from here to the West Coast, but there are no gas stations. There are no places for food, or at least they're not easily advertised. So you've got to then pull off the highway and start wandering around. And, if you kind of put yourself in the animal situation, it's very much similar. That highway may have disappeared or be fragmented, or the place that you were expecting to go fuel up doesn't exist anymore. So I think that's kind of a good way to think about it in human terms.
Yeah, no, that's a really good analogy. Thank you. I don't want to keep you too much longer. I know we had a tough time getting on this call, and hopefully people will be able to watch it and get a lot out of it, because I've gotten a lot out of it. Is there anything you'd like to share with people? Is there anything that people should know? Is there anything that people should do?
Absolutely. What I want to do is give a shout out to my teammates with the Endangered Species Coalition that are working at wildlife corridors in Pennsylvania. Endangered.org is the website for the Endangered Species Coalition, so endangered.org. And then if you type in Wildlife Corridors Pennsylvania, that will bring up our specific page. This campaign has been going on for over a year. We've got a really great group of folks that have been writing letters to the editor, been engaging different organizations around the state, all around the state. And one of the great things about it is we're finding and connecting with all these environmental organizations or community organizations or sportsmen's groups, which we hadn't communicated with. And I think kind of the silver lining of COVID with Zoom and everything, getting everybody on board with these shared goals. And so I really want to make sure that those folks are all recognized, because there are a lot of people in the state doing some great work behind the scenes to help reach out to their legislators, which got it into the Tourism and Recreation Committee. And so if you've got a local representative, give them a call, ask them to support it. If they're not on that committee, ask them to, put in a good word for those that are. And then when it does come to the floor, ask them to cast their vote for conservation quarters in Pennsylvania with HR 74.
Awesome. Awesome. Really great. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much for making time for us. And
Certainly.
I'm going to be following you and keeping in touch with you to see what's going on. It's really exciting to hear from you. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and keep up the great work that you're doing.
Thank you. I will stop the recording.